So something that our department has been doing, especially because of last year, we weren't able to have the in-person career fair, is that we're having different clubs and classes, sponsor a themed panel where we can bring in people who study or work under that topic, and they can come in and talk to current Cranbrook students about their career path. So last year, I know we had a law panel, we had a nonprofit panel, and we brought back different alumni to sort of talk about their career paths, and different clubs had sponsored them. So if any of you guys are in a club that's ever interested in talking with alumni or finding people who are in a career path that you're interested in, you're always able to come to our office and connect with us, and we can help get you guys connected to the right people. And so, yeah, when LITE Club came to us and said we want to talk to someone, preferably via Zoom, which is nice for us too, because it means they don't have to be local, we were able to come up with a list of people who probably could have worked out, and Sydney was chosen. Who would have thunk? That was amazing. I was so happy. Okay, I'm gonna wait one more minute here and then I think we'll get started. We're at 15 people, or we can start now. I think, let's go. So my name is Madison. I am the Alumni Engagement Coordinator at Cranbrook Schools. I'm class of 2010. Gordon Thompson was my English teacher for one semester. And I've been at Cranbrook for about 3 years now in January. And as I said, one of the things that my team does is help current students connect with alumni. So whether that's through your club, through your class, for a senior May, for an internship after you graduate, or even networking for a job after you graduate from college, we are here to help you. And I'm really excited about tonight, not just because Sydney is my sister, but because I think the topic's really cool. And I just think that we're gonna have a good conversation, and a good group of kids are here. So I'm gonna turn it over to the LITE Club presidents. Oh, before I do that, I do wanna explain how the questions are gonna work. So after all the introductions are done, I want you to open up the chat box. And if you'd rather type your question, you can feel free to type your question. If you want to say your question, just type in your name in the chat box and I'll call your name. I'll make sure that nobody is skipped and that everybody is, their question is read in order of how they typed it. And I'll read your question out loud for you if you want as well. So just when everything is said and done and introductions are over with, you can feel free to start writing questions into the chat box. And I'm here to help. You can even private message me if you have a question about asking questions. All right, sounds good. Roxanne, take it away.
Hello, everyone. If you don't know me already, I'm Roxanne Shaviro, and I'm one of the presidents of Leaders in the Environment Club here at Cranbrook. Before we get started, I would firstly like to thank Sydney on behalf of the rest of LITE Club for being here today. There are a ton of students here at the upper school in general who are interested in pursuing environmental careers, and so we're really grateful to be able to hear from her this evening about her experiences. We'd also like to thank the Alumni Office for coordinating tonight's event, and it really couldn't have happened without their help, so thank you. And like Madison said earlier, for any other clubs or students who may be interested in having an alum speak at a club event, you can email the Alumni Office at alumni@cranbrook.edu. And like all the other alumni events, this is recorded and it's going to be uploaded onto YouTube for any later viewing. And also thank you to Ray Ching, the other LITE president, and our advisor, Madame Borio. So with all that being said, I'll pass the mic over to Ray Ching.
Okay, hi, I'm Ray Ching. I'm one of the presidents of LITE Club, and tonight we welcome Sydney Sanders, who will talk about her work in environmental fields and how her experience at Cranbrook and beyond led her to her current job, which is a consultant at CEA. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat, and she will answer them at the end. So Sydney is a CK alumna from 2008 to 2012. She was a varsity swim team captain, a wilderness leader her junior and senior year, student council president, girls mentoring president on the conduct review board, and a member of the Gold Key. After Cranbrook, she got a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Studies with a focus in policy at Middlebury College. In 2015, she did a study abroad program in Copenhagen. Sydney was an intern at multiple environmental organizations, and she was a Middlebury College Environmental Studies Senior Seminar Student Consultant, where she co-wrote a 60-page report to educate state legislators on the impact of the proposed tax law on Vermont's low-income population and recommended a low-income rebate distribution system and presented the results to legislators. Then Sydney worked at the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance and the Climate Breakthrough Project. And today, Sydney is a philanthropic strategy consultant at CA Consulting. She has worked on ocean resilience, sustainable seafood, climate mitigation, and sustainable agriculture. And welcome, Sydney. I'm going to pass the mic over to you.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Roxanne. It's really great to be here, and I'm really excited to talk with all of you from LITE today. And thank you, Maddie, for helping make all of this work out tonight. So it's kind of weird to hear someone else talk about you. And as I had mentioned earlier to Rachel and Roxanne, this is making me feel a little bit old that I'm coming up on my 10-year reunion at Cranbrook. But today I'm super excited to talk about my path into the environmental sector. And so I'm planning on talking a bit about my current role at CEA Consulting and aspects of my experiences at Cranbrook and at Middlebury College that helped me to get to where I am today. And I'd also like to share just general advice and thoughts I have on the environmental space and a variety of different things you can do there, and take the advice, leave the advice, and we can also have a discussion afterwards. So really looking forward to the questions too. So to start off, as Rachel mentioned, I work for a small environmental consulting firm that's based in San Francisco called CEA Consulting. For the past year and a half, I've been living in Washington, DC, but I did live in San Francisco for about 3.5 years. Because of COVID, we're all in more of a remote setting, as I'm sure you can imagine. And so at CEA, we have 3 different practice areas. We have an environmental policy and regulatory group that does work along the US West Coast. We have a small recruiting practice for environmental nonprofits, and I work on our philanthropy team, which I'm happy to talk more about. So I started at CEA as a research associate about 6 months after I graduated from undergrad, became an associate, and have recently been promoted to being a senior associate. So I've been at CEA for about 5 years. And as Rachel mentioned, I've worked on some other projects in my capacity as a consultant. So I've worked on Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, the Climate Breakthrough Project. I've worked on other projects related to sustainable agriculture, sustainable seafood, and I have a lot of thoughts about those various topics. So definitely happy to answer questions about my role on specific projects, my thoughts on particular environmental issues, more so in the Q&A. But my environmental consulting firm is quite small. We have about 35 people, so very small organization, but we do work internationally. And so before I move on to kind of Cranbrook and Middlebury for some context on CEA Consulting, I'll just clarify. So the consulting work I do is for environmental nonprofits and private foundations. So you might be familiar with NGOs or nonprofits, and private foundations are similar in that they have similar missions to do good work in the world, but they operate a bit differently because instead of doing the work on the ground or being the implementer, they actually provide the funding for this work. So private foundations give grant dollars to organizations to do the environmental work on the ground. And so it's an important distinction because maybe in the financial sector, you're looking for a financial return on investment. In the environmental sector, an organization like a foundation gives money, and they're looking for, instead of a financial return on investment, they're looking for environmental outcomes to change. So overfishing to become reduced, or sustainable agriculture practices to be adopted. And so my organization and my team at my organization, we consult with environmental nonprofits and foundations on a variety of different environmental issues. And we do so by providing expert qualitative and quantitative research to produce public-facing reports. We do strategy reviews and strategy refreshes and provide different types of advice on aspects like that. So again, a bit on the jargony side, so happy to explain in practice what that actually looks like. But I think I'll pause there on CEA and move a bit briefly into my time at Cranbrook. And so I started at Cranbrook in 6th grade. And so I have to admit that when I was in high school, I had no idea that I wanted to work on environmental issues. So by being part of LITE Club, you are already many steps ahead of me by, knowing that this is an area of interest for you. And so in line with that, I didn't take any classes specific to environmental issues either. I took, a more core curriculum, and I think environmental studies was an elective class that I did not take. And so something that was definitely like a formative experience for me at Cranbrook was my participation in the wilderness program as a leader. A story for another time, I was evacuated my sophomore year. I got the stomach flu on the 2nd day, very traumatic experience. But it was amazing to come back as a leader my junior and senior years. And I think it really contributed to viewing myself as a leader and being able to kind of step up to that responsibility, and also just inspiring me to be more passionate about nature and leaving no trace, and having a lot of respect for the natural environment around me. And I also, again, went into undergrad having no idea I wanted to study environmental issues. I think I wrote on the Common App I wanted to study history, Spanish, and biology. And to be honest, I do think environmental studies can be a mix of all of those things, respect for other cultures and languages, and being interested in our histories and policies that got us to where we are today. And I think biology, having, an interest for the natural environment, is obviously valuable too. But at Middlebury, I did find environmental policy, and as my major, I was very late to declaring the end of my junior year of college, so it was a bit of a windy path to get there. But some of my main takeaways as I was preparing for this discussion today was really to emphasize that you do not have to major in, I know you're a few steps away from college, but just in case it's on your mind, you don't have to major in environmental studies in order to work in this field, because the environmental sector, it needs people that are marketing and communications experts. It needs people that can do the quantitative and the math and the science research. And it needs people who know computer science and who are policy experts and economic experts. And so I would encourage you to stay open-minded and find the way that you connect most with environmental issues, and not feel like you have to limit yourself to just one aspect of that. And so I wanted to highlight, I made a short list here of my friends working in the environmental sector, and I have a friend who's doing environmental law. She's in law school right now. I have friends that work for big environmental nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy, and I know people that work for really small environmental nonprofits on specific issues in specific regions. I know in the private sector, I have a friend who works or used to work for Live Nation, and so she was helping big music festivals become better with their recycling practices and more environmentally conscious. I have a friend working on energy efficiency and big real estate with her big real estate companies, and a friend working on solar energy, someone on climate finance, someone in more of the political sector. So keeping that all in mind, I just really wanted to share that there's so many different opportunities to connect your interest with environmental issues to the path and the skill set that works best for you. I also wanted to highlight the value of both Cranbrook and my experience at Middlebury with the power of networking. And so I think you might still be a bit of a distance away from having to kind of jump into the deep end of networking. But to me, Cranbrook was absolutely valuable in helping me get to my current career. And I think by the time I reached my junior, senior year in college, to when I landed my job, I probably spoke with 50 different people, many of them former Cranbrook students. And for me, it wasn't just about finding the right job, it was also about learning about different environmental opportunities and careers. And so for me, the Cranbrook network just proved to be super inspiring, and people were so helpful and curious and interested in connecting with people so I could continue to explore different career paths. And similar to what I was saying earlier about, there's a bunch of different environmental career opportunities, I would encourage you that to find the environmental issue that you're most passionate about, because there are a lot of environmental challenges that our world is facing, from climate to ocean to public health and air quality issues to, you know, all of those things and how they interact with justice. Environmental justice is a huge passion area of mine. The last piece before I'll stop for a bit and answer any questions. I had a professor in college who gave a piece of advice that I think really resonated with me about the importance of being a part-time activist, particularly a part-time environmental activist. And I think it's easy to get overwhelmed by all of the different environmental challenges and particularly climate challenges that our world is facing. And so, you know, I don't have a car, I'm a vegetarian, I don't shop on Amazon, but I do take an airplane and I don't compost. And so I think to remind yourself that there are ways that you can, you know, be a good environmentalist, but there's no such thing as like a perfect environmentalist. And so give yourself a little bit of credit and also cut yourself some slack as well when you think about all of the environmental decisions you want to make in your life. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions and have a discussion with all of you.
Okay, like we said before, if you have any questions, just drop in the chat or put your name or raise your hand with like the reaction button. There's like a raise hand button if you click on the reaction icon. So I can start with the first question. So what sparked your interest in environment? You said you were like kind of late to declaring your major, but like what specific thing made you decide to go into that direction?
That's a great question, and it's hard to pinpoint just one thing. I think I always knew I loved being outside, and I loved, you know, through wilderness, I loved being outside in nature, hiking, backpacking, going on walks. And so I think I knew I wanted to have a career that felt like it had a social impact. And so I actually felt like I was more drawn to the environmental space because of its intersection with environmental justice issues. And so growing up in the Detroit suburbs and being super aware of a lot of the different challenges in Detroit, I just became really interested in kind of that connection between social justice and environmental justice. And so I was starting to explore that my freshman year of college, and Middlebury has a big push on environmental issues as well. And Bill McKibben, if you know him from 350.org, he's really involved at Middlebury. So they definitely were promoting a lot of these ideas. And so my first summer after my freshman year of college, I interned for an organization in Detroit called Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice. And so for me, that really sealed the deal. Particularly, I remember touring an incinerator in Detroit and just learning about some of the public health impacts on the local neighborhoods from the air quality. And for me, that really made the connection that, you know, I love being outside, I love nature, but not everyone has access to that. And that's something that felt really important for me to want to, you know, learn more about and pursue more in my career.
We have a question from Zev in the chat. What is the main pollution problem in the ocean, and what is the best way to counter this problem?
That is an amazing question, and I could probably spend the entire hour just talking about that. I am potentially going to cheat and pick more than just one main pollution problem. So it's not technically pollution, but so the first one I want to start with, because it's the issue I'm most familiar with, is overfishing. So hopefully some of you heard of the Netflix movie that came out this past year, Seaspiracy, which was about overfishing and illegal fishing in the ocean. And so unfortunately, the movie wasn't quite factual in a lot of ways. Some of the data they used to inform the movie wasn't quite up to par, but that said, the main issues of overfishing, illegal fishing, and human rights abuses in fisheries, so particularly slavery at sea, are true issues. And so I think it's really coming down to big industrial fishing pressure. And so all over the world and for hundreds, thousands of years, people fish for their local communities, for their own, livelihoods, food security. And I fundamentally think that, like, who are we to say in the US that people can't do that? Because that is true to their identity and their communities. And so I think it's really important for us to look critically at industrial fisheries, and in particular, the role that they play in overfishing and illegally fishing. And so I think there's some really, really cool organizations out there, like Global Fishing Watch comes to mind, and they're doing a lot with AIS technology in order to help catch people that are illegally fishing in areas where they shouldn't be. And so I think a huge piece here is really around transparency and making sure that consumers in the US and elsewhere are really aware of where their seafood is coming from, because we care a lot about where, our hamburgers and hot dogs and all those things, we care about where those things are coming and how they land on our plate, but a lot of times people don't take that same degree of scrutiny to think about how their seafood lands on their plate. So I think that there's more we can do to hold big companies accountable for overfishing, for sure. The second kind of cheat way to respond to that about major pollution issue, one of the largest problems for the ocean by far is climate change. And so the ocean is a huge sink for carbon, and it's, causing a whole suite of detrimental issues when it comes to sea level rise, ocean acidification, what that means for coral reefs, for coastal areas, for fishing, for marine algae. I mean, it can get really dark and depressing pretty quickly. And so a huge way to actually help protect the ocean is to solve the issue of climate change and reducing our carbon emissions on land, because it has so many spillover effects to needing to protect our ocean as well. The third one, and I'll stop, sewage pollution. It is kind of a big secret about how much big companies are actually polluting our oceans through sewage pollution and industrial pollution.
We have a question here from Oriana, and then I'm going to get to Senora Rodriguez in a second here. It's interesting to hear about how so many different subjects factor into the climate. What do you think are some climate applications for people with more fundamental science backgrounds like physics?
So I don't think physics was one of my best subjects at Cranbrook. So I might take a step back and talk a little bit more broadly about, science applications. So apologies to my physics teacher at Cranbrook. So before I selected environmental policy as my major, I was actually going to do conservation biology. And so I think there's definitely really important research that can be done on the climate side related to, so on the climate side, I had a former colleague who did research in Alaska. And so they were collecting ice samples from glaciers, and it was really with the lens of understanding how climate change was affecting that. So I think there's definitely like the scientific lab research that can be done for sure on the more science application side. I also think it's really important that there's, the ability for scientists to be able to communicate what they're learning to people like us, or, normal people across the country. And so I think there's really important work that can be done on the science communication side. So a big plug for your English classes and the importance of being a strong writer and communicator, regardless of what profession you pursue. And I know there's a whole suite of different environmental, more science angle roles. I can think more about that. And at the end, I'm happy to also give out my email address. And I'm going to try to think about some friends that maybe work in that space. Apologies that I'm not the most well-versed in it.
All right, Senora Rodriguez, you're next. Oh, maybe I can help.
I was trying to figure it out how to unmute. Hi, Sydney. So nice to see you.
Hi.
And how are you? It makes me very, very proud to see you. I was very excited when I saw your picture in the flyers, and I thought I need to stop by. And it makes me proud to see you, how you're, like, everything you have learned, everything that you're doing right now. So, and thank you for coming today to talk to us. My question is about, you're talking about how Cranbrook impacted you in so many ways in your education and in what you're learning and kind of the path that you took. You also mentioned Spanish, and I want you to share a little bit how the language that you decided to take has helped you in this path that you have taken. What is the connection that you see with the in helping the impact in the environment, and if you can share any of that.
Absolutely, and it's so great to see you. Igor was my teacher my sophomore year at Cranbrook, which I believe was your first year.
Probably, yes. I think it was. Yeah, I think it was my first year. My first year.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's
my goodness.
Awesome. I really appreciate the question. I really appreciate that question. Absolutely. So a few different things. So I think that having language and cultural competency is only going to become more important in the world we're living in. And it's particularly important when you think about environmental issues because of the global nature of these problems. You know, whether we're talking about ocean conservation, whether we're talking about climate change, these are issues and topics that everyone is facing in this world. And so only having, you know, this Western or US or European perspective on these issues is really limiting, because for hundreds of years, like, our country has made a lot of decisions that have influenced how the world operates, particularly with our carbon emissions. And so I think it's time for us to actually learn from a lot of different cultures, and particularly, you know, smaller communities that have been stewards of their own resources, particularly different Native groups, I think have a lot of really valuable, you know, experience over thousands of years of taking care of their own natural resources. And so I think being able to communicate across different languages and cultures is super important. And I'm seeing it as super relevant in my current work, because as we are hiring new people at my firm, it's a requirement in our interview process that people have language or cultural competency, because we do international work. And it's no longer just, you know, a nice thing to have, it's absolutely necessary. And I'm super grateful for the people on my team that are fluent in Spanish, because, you know, that is a skill that I wish I had, and I'm not quite there, but it's really important for us when we conduct interviews with different stakeholders in different areas, and when we are doing research, to be able to understand perspectives that are written in different languages. And so the example that really comes to mind, I did a project related to fisheries sustainability in 2019. And so my project team visited about a dozen different countries over the course of the year, and we interviewed different government officials, nonprofit representatives, fishers, local, other local people, to learn about fisheries conservation measures. And so I got to go to China, Japan, and Peru. And so I wasn't quite at the ability to be able to conduct my interviews in Spanish, but it was really important to be able to build trust and relationships in that context, to be able to, you know, have dinner with someone and show that I was trying and that I cared about their perspective, and that I was willing to maybe make a fool of myself by making some poor grammar mistakes as well. But it was really important, I think, in helping to show that we were truly seeking to understand their fisheries conservation challenges and their progress. And if I had just come there as someone from the US who spoke no Spanish, I think it really would have perpetuated this idea that I'm, you know, an outsider, or that I'm just helicoptering in to take this information and then leave and go back to the US. And so I think it was super important for the global nature of the project.
Thank you, Sydney. We have another hand raised here. Go ahead, Hamad.
Hello. I was just wondering, if there was any environmental topic that you think LITE should focus like for the rest of the year? Is there any environmental topic that you believe LITE should focus on specifically? Like, 'cause we do a lot of focus on many broad topics and many different methods to increase sustainability. But is there anything that you think we should specifically focus on?
So I love the question, and I think there's probably no wrong answer here, because I think my main thought is, find the topics that are most interesting to you, find the topics that you can't get enough of, you want to listen to podcasts on, you want to read about, you want to watch movies about, and become the expert on the areas that you care about the most. I've particularly found myself that I'm kind of an environmental generalist. I care about a lot of different environmental issues, but if I had to pick one that I think is super, super high priority and has ripple effects on everything, it's climate. And so whether it's climate mitigation, climate adaptation, resilience, you name it, I think it's not going away, it's becoming a bigger issue, and it touches everything. And so even we find in the work we do on fisheries conservation, you can have really awesome fisheries conservation practices, but if the water is getting warmer or the pH is changing, the fish are going to move. And so it doesn't really matter how good you manage the fishery, because the water is becoming warmer, those fish stocks are going to move. And so it completely changes the game. And so find the issue you care about the most, but definitely consider climate.
We have another question in the chat here. What do you think an average person can do to help the environment? And how do you encourage and inspire friends, families, and strangers to change their perspectives and lifestyles?
I love that question so much. Wait, I just want to actually read it again to make sure. Okay. So an average person can do so many different things. So I'm not exactly sure where I read this, so take it with a grain of salt, but I believe I read that the 3 best things that you can do for the environment, so again, take best with a grain of salt, are to not get on an airplane, to not eat meat, and to not have kids. So take that for what you want, but I think that there's so many things you can do. And so, I have some friends that are super into recycling and composting. And so that, and only, going to stores that sell things in bulk. So getting their detergent, their dish soap, all of those things, all natural, reusing, whether it's like a makeup remover pad to paper towel, all of that. And I think there's other people I know, and myself personally, I try really hard to shop locally and to support like local companies and more environmental companies. And so I'm sorry if I offend anyone, and I can talk your ear off about it. I hate Amazon, and it's really something I feel very strongly about for a lot of reasons, particularly their environmental practices. So something to keep in mind. I think it's really hard in the Detroit suburbs, but not having a car is something that I feel, proud about. And it was really important for me after college that I moved to a city where I didn't need a car. And so I wanted to move to a place that had strong public transportation, and also felt like it was a good way to explore and get to know a new city. I think becoming a vegetarian isn't necessarily necessary. I think thinking about your meat consumption, thinking about where your food comes from, trying to eat more local foods that are in season. I think fast fashion is a huge problem. So thinking about buying things that are going to last for multiple seasons, and maybe avoiding some of the stuff that's overly trendy and you're not going to wear it the next season. And so I think being conscious about the clothes that you buy and all of that, super, super important. Using less plastic, at least a paper bag at the grocery store, or bring your own bag, that sort of thing. I could go on and on, but I really appreciate the question. And then how do I encourage or inspire my friends and family? One thing I've learned over the years, and I'm sure my sister can agree with this, is that when you talk to people about environmental issues, I found it's really important to not be on this high horse and to not act like you are maybe morally superior to them because you make good environmental decisions. And so I think finding common ground with people is really important, because if I talk to a bunch of my friends and said, I can't believe you own a car, that's horrible, think about how horrible that is for the environment, I'm not going to make a lot of progress there depending on where they live. And so I think you can definitely lead by example and weave your perspectives into conversation thoughtfully. But I think also finding things that people really care about. I have a friend that really likes to throw dinner parties, and so talking to her about ways they can cut back on waste and be thoughtful about doing that was really a way that interested her. And so I found that to be a super valuable approach.
And then we have Roxanne with a question too.
Okay, so I know you mentioned earlier some of the work you were doing in other countries, and I think I heard in the introduction that you did, I'm not sure exactly what, but something in Copenhagen. And so as someone who I personally would, I mean, because of COVID, I haven't traveled, but I would like to think I love traveling. I'm wondering, like, one, like, what could you talk about what you did in Copenhagen, and two, just like what aspects of your career have helped you travel, but I guess also work in other countries as well, which I know you mentioned earlier as well.
Absolutely, great question. So I was in Copenhagen in 2015 for one semester. I studied abroad there, and it was amazing. It was a blast. And so I chose to go the spring semester of my junior year of college. And I picked Copenhagen. At that point, I knew I was studying environmental studies, and I knew I was really interested in cities. And so that's something that I'm really passionate about. I'm applying to urban planning master's programs right now. So happy to talk more about that as well. But I picked Copenhagen because I was really interested in cities, and having gone to school up to that point in, Detroit suburbs and rural Vermont, I hadn't really had an opportunity to live in a city. And so for me, Copenhagen was amazing because it was a great way to get, a crash course in urban planning best practices. So Copenhagen is a leader when it comes to public transportation and bike transportation replacing car travel. I think, close to 40% of their population commutes to work and school on a regular basis, rain, snow, sleet, on a bike. And I did see women biking in high heels. So nothing stopped the people there from biking. And so Copenhagen was a great experience. I got to travel to different cities throughout Europe, learn about different urban planning theories, learn a bit of Danish, and really just explore and live in a very, very different environment for a year. Over the course of my career, I've gotten to travel quite a bit. So some of that has been through the opportunity to participate in or speak at conferences. And so that's something to keep in mind. I've actually attended conferences as a student in undergrad before. And so if you find a cool conference, a lot of times they do have a cheaper price of attendance for students. And so something to keep in mind if something piques your interest. So through that, I've got to go to Miami, Seattle, San Diego, New York, and Boston for various conferences. And then through my work related to sustainable fisheries, like I mentioned, we visited a whole bunch of different places. And so I flew to China and Japan with one of my coworkers for about 3 weeks, and we visited half a dozen fisheries to conduct different interviews, to visit the fishing ports, which were the smelliest places I've ever been in my entire life. And to, just see the actual problem with overfishing when you are at a port and you just see thousands and thousands of, or hundreds and hundreds of different fishing vessels, and just understanding the magnitude of the problem. And then I got to go to Hawaii for work as well related to fisheries. So that was part of it. I think working on fisheries, I got to go to really cool places because we got to, go to different coasts and different port cities in order to do a lot of the interviewing. But yeah, I think no matter what career you choose, I think conferences are a really cool opportunity to go to different cities. And so it's really easy though, once you get there, to just sit in a conference room or at a hotel. And so I would always encourage you to take a couple extra days to explore the place you get to go to as well.
All right, Ray Ching, good timing.
Okay, so I also bike to school and I bike between campuses at Cranbrook. So I think it's really interesting how like you went to like Copenhagen where like 40% of the population bikes. So what makes it that people want to bike there and not a lot of people bike at Cranbrook right now, just like me and this other freshman? And then what other things encourage biking and active transport and just the less use of cars in general?
Awesome, love the question. So I think a huge thing I saw in Copenhagen was that there were separate bike lanes, because, you know, to encourage people to bike, you need bike infrastructure, and that comes with safety. Because people don't want to bike on the road, on the same road they're sharing with cars, because as you probably know, a lot of times cars don't respect bikes, or they might kind of get up in your space or not give you enough space to turn, or they try to pass you, that sort of thing. And so what was super cool to see in Copenhagen was that there were specific lanes just for bikes. Bikes had their own lights as well, and so they would take precedence. So sometimes the cars would actually have to wait because the bikes got to take priority at an intersection and they got to go first. There were certain bridges and roads that were bike only, and in the downtown of the city, it was pedestrian only, so people could walk and no cars were allowed, so you could only have people walking and bikes. And there were very, very few parking areas either, and if you had to park, it would be super expensive. And so I think that required people to be thoughtful about how they entered the center of the city. So they would take public transportation or bike, because there was a lot of places to park your bike, but not necessarily to park your car. And so I think the infrastructure with an emphasis on safety is super, super important. And I know at least in DC, we're seeing a lot more of what they call protected bike lanes pop up. And so those would be bike lanes that have barriers. So maybe it's a curb strip or some cone, like permanent cones that essentially protect the bike lane from the road, so cars don't kind of weave in and out of the bike lane. I think a lot of times too, people park in bike lanes, or they open their car door into bike lanes. And so bikers want to be respected, they want to feel safe, and people want to bike when it's convenient as well. And so I think if you're limiting ways for cars to get someplace or to park, people will find other ways to get to where they want to go. And people prefer to take public transportation and bike when it's easier. And so I think that we have to be thoughtful about making driving a car more difficult. So just some thoughts that come to mind.
Great, thank you, Sydney. Do we have anyone else with any more questions here? Oh yes, we got a couple. Okay, we'll go Grant and then Gordon.
I was wondering if there's like a better like alternative to single-use plastics like wrappers you see every day in the store, or if like the best way to respond to it is just to reduce your waste and try to avoid certain things.
I think that's a good question, and I think it's probably a combination of both. I definitely could be better about plastic, and that's something that I am trying to really work on. And so I still do buy plastic bags, but I try to be really thoughtful about when I use them and rinsing them out and reusing them. I think there's some really cool alternatives when it comes to like beeswax paper. So I've seen that as a good substitute for, you know, wrapping up food to put in your refrigerator. And so I think that's something to keep in mind. I also think that using a reusable bag, you know, if we're talking bigger scale, like a tote bag or a grocery bag or something, can be a smart choice. But if you're anything like me, you might lose that tote bag and buy a new tote bag and do that again and again. And those types of reusable bags have an environmental footprint as well. And I think, you know, being conscious about your consumption, whether it's plastic or not, is probably a really important thing to consider. And so I've also invested in a lot of Tupperware, and I try to be really thoughtful about using that and washing it out so I can reuse it. And I bought glass Tupperware. So something to keep in mind too, I think, is, you know, both, as you mentioned, reducing how much you use and also finding alternatives. But I think the main thing is you have to figure out what works for you, because if every time you take a plastic bag, you feel super guilty and super horrible about yourself, but then you do it again the next day, I think you have to figure out how to break that cycle and figure out what's convenient for you, like leaving your reusable bag in the back of your car. So every time you go to the grocery store, it's already there and ready to go. So I think it's also about finding the right habits.
All right, Mr. Thompson is next.
Okay, I'm going to go big and a little bit dark, so forgive me. But I am an English teacher after all. And so my question is, where do you find hope or inspiration? Because, you know, I've been concerned about the environment my whole life, and it can be a rather grim and lonely business. You know, I just was reading about how perhaps the Southern Ocean is going to change in such a way that these like currents are going to swirl around and like, you know, melt Antarctica from the bottom. And like, so that's just an example of like the many very sort of foreboding things that we see in the news. So like, where do you go, you know, to continue the good work that you're doing and feel that, you know, you can really make the difference that you want to make and not be overwhelmed by all the bad stuff?
I love it. So I am continuously inspired and excited by what I see in the activism space. And so for me, groups like the Sunrise Movement, especially youth activism, I think is amazing. And I think it's so inspiring that people, especially young people, are willing to put in the time and to put themselves physically out there to lead protests and to make a big splash that gets media attention and gets people's attention. And so I feel really inspired by groups also like Europe Beyond Coal, and the Beyond Coal movement in the US. I think, yeah, I'm super inspired and always really interested in those types of activist efforts. And so I really like reading about it and watching videos about it and learning about direct action. And that's something that I don't do. I do a lot of my work behind a computer, you know, at a desk. And so sometimes I definitely miss the days of actually being able to be out there, be out at a protest, and I think feel that really amazing energy of the people around you. And so being surrounded by people that also care about the same thing. And the second piece, I think it's always really important for me to find a way to recharge in nature. And so finding times to go out on hikes and to spend time in parks and get out into nature is really important, because things are changing, and it's really important to be able to appreciate nature near you while it's still intact, and to be able to recharge. So I agree, it can definitely be doom and gloom. So third, I would say maybe limit your how much you're reading the news. Sometimes that's actually more detrimental than it is helpful.
All right, Rachel.
Okay, so can you talk more about like your job? Like, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? Like, do you just like meet with groups and talk with them about your projects, or like what do you do specifically?
Awesome. I've avoided that up until this point, so very good question. So as a environmental consultant, at any given time, I'm probably working on 5 different projects. So I think of that really similar to taking different classes, because for each of those different projects, I'm working on a different team. I have a different client. We have different due dates for our different projects, our different reports and deliverables. And they also are different lengths. So some projects might be a few months, some might be a year, or some might be ongoing. So for me, I really value that, you know, diversity, because it keeps things really interesting. And if I'm getting a little bit low energy or bored at something, I can kind of move on to the next. And so My projects, I do a lot of interviewing, so what we call qualitative research. So interviewing different experts in the field to get their opinions about things. And I do a lot of reading and writing. And so it's really common for my projects that I'm working on a project team to create a report. And so we might be creating a report. One I'm working on right now is related to sustainable seafood and progress on sustainable seafood by a collection of nonprofits working in the space using a variety of different tactics. So we interview the different organizations, learn about their progress. We have them send us their data so we can track their progress more quantitatively as well. We do a lot of research to understand the latest science, so around fisheries conservation, illegal fishing, understanding what data is out there from the academic community. And we do a lot of writing. And so I do write a lot of reports and memos and public facing materials as well. So that's a huge part of what I do. And then presenting recommendations and findings and insights to our clients. And so to walk you through a typical day, let me actually pull up my calendar today and see if there's anything interesting from this week. So one thing I was working on this week, I work on a really awesome climate project called the Climate Breakthrough Project. And so encourage you all to look it up, but essentially this group gives away $3 million over the course of 3 years to different individuals through the form of an award. And so it's super cool. It's the largest environmental award in the world. It's larger than the Goldman Environmental Prize, if you're familiar. But it's super cool because we find amazing people working on climate mitigation, and we give them $3 million with very few strings attached to do their work and to do really big, large scale work on climate mitigation. And so my role on this project is to vet different people for the award, which is amazing because people will source different names to me. So I get to do some research on my computer, learn about who these people are, their background, their successes, their strategies. I get to call people that know them, their references, kind of like a job interview. And I get to ask a whole bunch of questions about what this person is like. Are they a big thinker? What have been their successes and challenges, and learn about how they approach their work. I get to interview the person. I get to nominate them for the award. And so that is definitely an ongoing project where we help to select people for this award. But it's also super cool, going to spin out to be its own independent organization. So I'm helping on some of the operations for this group to become its own nonprofit. And so I'm learning how to do file management and data systems for the team. And we're applying through the IRS to become an organization. So much different skills than the actual program work for the project that I do around vetting candidates. I'm actually doing a lot of operations for the project as well. For some of my other fisheries related work, again, we're working on different reports that definitely have an academic flavor to them, where we're using qualitative and quantitative research to produce public facing reports for the community. And yeah, I'm happy to answer follow-up questions, but maybe I'll stop there. That was just a flavor of some of my current work.
All right, so I don't see any more questions here. Does anyone else? I have one final one to end on, but does anyone else have anything else they want to ask? Okay, so Sydney, I want you to leave one final piece of advice with these students. They're already on a good track being in LITE Club and, thinking about these really tough thoughts. I too am inspired by the next generation. I think especially Cranbrook students, at least the ones I've interacted with, are cream of the crop. They're just absolutely unbelievable. So I'm proud of all of you guys for being here. And if you have another piece of advice, Sydney, that'd be great to end on.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this has been so exciting to be able to hear all of your interests in environmental issue areas, and I'll definitely share my email as well. I think one thing to really keep in mind that I think I was uncomfortable with at first was to really rely on Cranbrook after I graduated. And I think there's this idea that once you graduate from here, you know, you're moving on to bigger or better things, you know, going to college and getting your first job. And I find myself constantly coming back to the Cranbrook community and even to people that I have never known before. And so just in the past few weeks, I've had a conversation with a recent graduate that I'm helping from Cranbrook that I'm helping to mentor on her environmental career. She's a sophomore in college, and I also have a call tomorrow with someone a few years older than me that I didn't even know, but she's applying to, I didn't know at Cranbrook, but she's applying to a job at my company. And so I think something to really keep in mind is just that the Cranbrook network is really there for you, even for people that you have never met before. And I hope you consider me to be part of that network now. And I would happily have a call with anyone who reaches out to learn a little bit more about your interests and how I can help, because, you know, later in your career too, when you're thinking about jobs, my company might not have a job opening, but I have dozens of friends that work on environmental issues. And so if you form those connections with people who already feel connected to you because you're in the Cranbrook network, who knows what doors that they could open for you. And so definitely something to keep in mind. And I'd encourage you to take the risk and have those phone calls and not feel uncomfortable, because again, over the course of finding my job, I think I spoke to 50 different people to try to figure out where I wanted to land. And so definitely feel free to lean on Cranbrook. And I will send through my email address right now.
Well, thank you so much, Sydney. Yes, Sydney just put her email in the chat there. If you guys are on LinkedIn, feel free to add her as well. I want to do a small plug really quickly. Again, if you are in another club or part of a class that is interested in connecting with alumni, or if you specifically just have questions about a certain alumni or alumni who are in a specific field, please email me at alumni@cranbrook.edu. Really easy to remember. Our offices are also right beneath College Counseling, so feel free to stop by if you ever want to see any of us. If you do have a LinkedIn page, feel free to add me as well, Madison Sanders. I'm able to add you to the Cranbrook group, which is just filled with Cranbrook alumni. We have about 3,000 people in there, a few current students, but that's where we post anything that alumni are doing, including job hires, including people looking for internships, and just cool projects that people are working on. So again, thank you all. I know that this was a crazy week for a lot of you. I know we had mock rescues and sit-down dinners, and tomorrow is the last day. So hope you all have a great holiday, great break, great new year, and thank you all for spending an hour here with us tonight.